but it made sense for her character. She was an athletic and intelligent person who was good with people. Rutten had graduated the previous year, and after the couple left college, their relationship became more intimate. Rutten described them having sex 20 to 30 times over the 4 years following college. As much as he cared about Lazarus, he didn't feel like she was the one. Lazarus felt differently. In her early years on the force, she had a roommate named Michael Hargreaves, who said that Lazarus claimed to love Rutten. Her life seemed to revolve around the man, and she wouldn't date anyone else. Rutten had dated multiple women during and after college, and it seemed that he had finally found the woman who he felt was the one, Sherri Rasmussen. Sherri Rasmussen had started attending Loma Linda University at 16 years old. She had wanted to become a nurse from a young age and quickly made her dream a reality. By her late 20s, Rasmussen had become the director of critical care nursing at Glendale Adventist Hospital. She gave presentations and taught classes to other nurses internationally. The two met in the summer of 1984. Rutten fell in love with Rasmussen right away, and the two were engaged the following year. It's reported that Lazarus wasn't aware that Rutten was seeing other women. He claims that they were never exclusive, but at the same time, it seems like he may have intentionally not told her about the other women. Lazarus claimed that she did think that they were exclusive, and when she found out about the engagement, she asked him to come over so they could talk. After she professed her love for him and begged him to be with her, the couple had sex, but afterward, Rutten told her he was still going to marry Rasmussen. He claimed in court that that was the only time they had sex after he became engaged to Rasmussen. Now, this is shitty behavior to be done by anyone. Stringing one partner along while seeing other people on the side, keeping the other relationship a secret. Rutten having sex with Lazarus and still marrying Rasmussen does make him an ass, but it doesn't justify anybody dying. Lazarus wrote in her journal, quote, "I really don't feel like working. I found out that John is getting married. I'm very depressed, very sad. My concentration was -10, end quote. Hargreaves explained that she was very picky and would only date men who were just like Rutten. Lazarus also wrote a letter to Rutten's mother, which was postmarked August 6, 1985, where she told his mother, quote, "I'm truly in love with John, and the past year has really torn me up. I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision," end quote. In the 5 months that Rutten and Rasmussen were engaged, Lazarus made her presence known. On one occasion, she showed up at Rutten's condo in tight-fitting workout clothes and asked if he could wax her skis for her. Even though his fiancée objected, he did it anyway. When Lazarus returned to pick up the skis, she did it at a time when Rasmussen was alone and she wore her uniform with her service weapon clearly displayed. She also confronted Rasmussen at work, telling her that Rutten was her boyfriend and, quote, "If I can't have John, nobody can," end quote. The nurse asked her fiancé to ask Lazarus to leave her alone, but he told her to just ignore the woman and believed she would eventually get over it. Rasmussen talked to both her father, Nels Rasmussen, and a coworker, Peggy Crabtree, about how she would see the scorned woman everywhere she went. Crabtree explained, quote, "She couldn't go out to the store or go to the gym without having this woman show up," end quote. Her father said that she believed she was being followed by someone in disguise. Rasmussen had told him that it looked like a woman who was dressed as a boy. She said that whoever it was had wild-looking eyes. Gee, I wonder who that could have been. John Rutten and Sherri Rasmussen were married on November 23, 1985. Over the next 4 months, the couple settled into married life in their Van Nuys condo. Rutten had left his job with hard drive manufacturer Micropolis and started working for an engineering company. On the morning of February 24, 1986, Rasmussen was still in bed when Rutten left for work at about 7:20 a.m. She was scheduled to give a mandatory human resources class for some of the nurses that morning, but she didn't want to, and she told her husband that she was thinking about calling in sick. She had hurt her back previously doing aerobics and thought that that was a good excuse to play hooky. Rutten encouraged her to just get the class over with and left for work. Rutten called his wife at home a couple of times and didn't get an answer, so he assumed she had decided to go to work. He called her office, but her assistant said that she hadn't seen her all morning. That wasn't unusual, though, as she regularly skipped going into her office on days where she was giving a class. Rutten, having no reason for concern, finished his workday and ran some errands before heading home. When he pulled into their garage, he saw that the door was open and Rasmussen's silver BMW, his engagement gift to her, was gone. He also discovered some glass on the ground and assumed she hit something while backing out of the driveway. Maybe that got her flustered and she forgot to close the garage door. After walking up the stairs into the living room, Rutten got the shock of his life. His wife was laying face up on the brown carpet, still in a red bathrobe, camisole, and underwear. His brain immediately questioned why she would be lying on the floor like that, but he quickly realized that she had been severely beaten. Her stiffened arms were sticking up and there was blood on her face. He reached down and touched one of her legs, which was cold and stiff. He checked her pulse and found none, so he called 911. There had clearly been a struggle. A tall stereo speaker had been knocked over, a ceramic vase was broken on the floor, 2 shelves on a cabinet had been knocked over, and stereo equipment on a shelf was knocked over. One of the sliding glass doors on the top floor that opened to the back balcony was broken. The glass had fallen from the balcony to the driveway below and was the source of the glass that Rutten had seen when he arrived home. There was a VCR and a CD player stacked neatly by the front door as if someone was planning to take them, but never did. There was no sign of forced entry, and there was no sign that anywhere else in the house had been ransacked. Oh, except for the fact that the couple's marriage license was missing. Weird, right? Sherri Rasmussen had 3 bullet wounds to her chest, all .38 caliber. 2 of them were contact wounds from the gun being pressed against Rasmussen's body while being fired. A pink and green blanket found on a chair in the living room had a bullet hole in it and was theorized that the killer wrapped it around their gun to muffle the gunshots. There were several wounds on her face, one that looked like she may have been struck with the vase, and the other that looked like she may have been pistol whipped. Investigators also found a bite mark on the inside of Rasmussen's left forearm. Police swabbed the wound and collected DNA and made an impression of the bite mark. John was interviewed by police and was quickly ruled out as a suspect. The reason being, the lead investigator, Lyle Mayer, had already decided that the murder was the result of a botched burglary. Detective Mayer explained to Rutten that he believed that 1 or more burglars entered through the front door because it was probably unlocked and his wife came downstairs, surprising them. Rasmussen's parents arrived in Los Angeles from Arizona the following day. Nels Rasmussen immediately asked Detective Mayer if he had looked into John's ex-girlfriend, who was a cop. He relayed all the stories he had been told by his daughter about the confrontations she had had with Lazarus. The grieving father was told that he watched too many cop shows. Rutten also didn't share his father-in-law's suspicion of Lazarus. Detective Mayer claimed that he did question Rutten about Nels's accusations. Rutten dismissed the idea, and Mayer trusted the husband more than the father. The idea that Rasmussen was murdered during a botched burglary was reinforced when another burglary was reported in the area. 2 days after the murder, a woman was robbed at gunpoint by 2 Hispanic men. They became the prime suspects in the case. The stolen BMW was found a few miles away from the condo 10 days later. Investigators found fingerprints, hairs, and blood in the car, but none of it helped move the case forward. 2 weeks after the murder, Lazarus reported that her car was broken into and that her off-duty weapon had been stolen. The weapon just happened to be a Smith & Wesson Model 49 .38 caliber revolver. It was a gun that was compatible with the Federal Plus P ammunition that had been used in the murder. The Rasmussens continued calling the LAPD, inquiring about the status of their daughter's case. They put up a $10,000 reward for information on the case. They traveled to Los Angeles after a few years and held a press conference, reminding people of the reward, but it didn't bring in any leads. Rutten would later admit in court that he and Lazarus had sex 2 more times after Rasmussen's death. In 1989, she invited Rutten on a scuba diving trip to Hawaii. He called Detective Mayer to make sure that nothing had ever come up that connected her to his wife's murder. When Mayer assured him that Lazarus was not a suspect, he agreed to go on the trip. The couple seemed to fall out of contact after that.
He met Greg and I in Hawaii, okay?
That was something you guys kind of planned together, like go as a group, or you ran into him? Or?
No, I think that obviously I must have talked to him, and I said, hey, I'm going to Hawaii with my buddy Greg. We're scuba. We just got certified scuba diving. We're going to be in Hawaii. Hey, if you want to come and join us, come join us.
Right.
And I think that's what it was. I may have asked some other people to as well. What island did we go to? I think the Big Island in Kauai. He either met us on the Big Island or Kauai. I'm thinking of Greg and I might have scuba dived a lot on the Big Island, as well as Kauai. I don't remember which island. Again, I'd have to look at my pictures.
Lazarus married a fellow police officer in 1996, and the couple adopted a daughter. Rutten eventually remarried as well. The murder of Sherri Rasmussen was filed away with the rest of the cold cases. In 2001, the LAPD put together a unit to try to solve cold cases. The team had reviewed all of the cold cases that had happened in 1960 or later. After the review, they were left with 1,400 cases that they felt had good enough forensic evidence that they could use some new techniques to solve the cases. Criminalist Jennifer Francis opened the Rasmussen case and noticed that there was a swab of DNA evidence listed, but was not included with the rest of the evidence. Normally, the evidence will be stored in the coroner's freezer while the case is active, before being transferred to long-term storage when the case goes cold. They searched the freezer by hand and found the manila envelope still inside the freezer. The envelope was damaged, but the tube that housed the swab was still intact and sealed. The DNA results didn't bring up any hits in the system. Law enforcement used a national database of DNA results called the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. If anyone had had their DNA entered into the system before then, they would have popped up as a match. There was no match to the DNA, but the results did show that the DNA on the bite mark had come from a female. Francis took the results to the cold case unit and proposed that they reopen the case, since the original theory was that Rasmussen was killed by two men. The unit shrugged it off. They suggested that one of the burglars could have been female, and the case was put back on the shelf. In 2009, Detective Jim Nuttall was assigned the case for one final review. He also found the fact that the DNA was female concerning. He brought the issue to his supervisor, who finally took the case's discrepancies seriously and assigned 2 more detectives to the case. As this new crew of fresh detectives went over the details of the case, they concluded that Rasmussen did not come downstairs and surprise burglars. The evidence showed that someone had entered the house either by picking the lock or because the front door was unlocked. The intruder went all the way upstairs and confronted Rasmussen. 2 shots were fired upstairs that shattered the glass of the sliding door. Rasmussen fled downstairs and tried to hit the panic button on the alarm, but she was stopped before she was able to. They believe that Sherri was able to somehow knock the gun out of her assailant's hand and get them into a headlock, this being the reason for the bite mark. Once free, the attacker grabbed the ceramic vase and hit Rasmussen over the head with it. The killer was able to retrieve the gun and shoot the victim once in the chest, which was a through and through. They then wrapped the blanket around the gun and fired 2 more shots into her chest, killing her. Another detail that concerned the detectives was the bloody mark on the CD player that was sitting near the front door. The blood had been tested and belonged to Rasmussen, so that meant that whoever killed Sherri picked up the CD player and stacked it by the front door after killing her, then fled the scene, which didn't make sense. To Detective Nuttall and his colleagues, it looked like a murder that had been staged to look like a botched burglary. It was clear that they were looking for a female with motive to kill Sherri Rasmussen, who also had the knowledge to stage a burglary. It was a single note inside the file made by Detective Mayers that read, quote, "John Rutten called. Verified Stephanie Lazarus, P.O., was former girlfriend," end quote, that started the detectives down a path to the real killer. These detectives knew nothing of Nels Rasmussen and his insistence that Lazarus was his daughter's killer. Nothing about it was ever included in the file. Some think that details about it were actually removed from the file. They assumed that the P.O. in the note meant police officer, and when they ran a search for an officer named Stephanie Lazarus, they were presented with an LAPD officer who was currently working in the art theft division. They talked to John Rutten, who told them that he still didn't believe his ex-girlfriend had anything to do with it. Then they called Nels, who was extremely frustrated to have spent almost 2 decades trying to get the police to consider Lazarus a suspect, to now suddenly have new detectives come to him with this newfound discovery. For 4 months, the investigation continued as a confidential investigation. They didn't want anyone at the Van Nuys office to know that Officer Lazarus was being investigated, because word would easily get back to her. Once they were sure they were on the right track, the Internal Affairs Group, Special Operations Section, began working on the case. The last piece of the puzzle was to obtain Lazarus's DNA to compare to DNA from the Bitemark. A team staked out Lazarus and her adopted daughter as they went shopping at Costco. The two had a snack at some outside tables after they went shopping, and the team was able to recover a cup and straw that Lazarus had been using. 2 days later, the DNA came back a match. Stephanie Lazarus murdered Sherri Rasmussen 23 years ago. On June 5, 2009, with all of the evidence in hand, they called Lazarus to meet with them at the lockup at Parker Center. They chose that location because it was a facility where officers had to check their weapon in order to enter the building. This would eliminate any chance of gunshots if she became violent or decided to resist when she was arrested. They told